back to Rich Bag Creations. Can't believe it's been this long since I last said that sentence. It feels a little bit weird, but I think we're finally back after a lot of time. If you want to figure out more why we were gone for that long, I think we're gonna post a video about that the next video after this. But for this project, we're gonna make the sign from Knockturn Alley, so let's get started. So starting off the project, I have this cardboard cutout of the general shape that I want the sign to have. Now I'm going to add some aluminum foil and some tape to just bump out the shape so it isn't that flat and then I don't have to use that much paper mache and paper clay later on. Rolling up the pieces, I'm just going to try to measure them out roughly in the atomical shape that I want. The hand ended up being a little bit sausagey, so you might want to go a little bit less on the aluminum foil at this point so it doesn't end up being too thick later on. Last of all, with the aluminum foil, I've folded up a piece that is quite smooth, so it's an easier surface to work on, and especially since I'm gonna draw all the letters on this area later on, I wanted a surface that was easier to paint on so that the paint doesn't get stuck in all the little nooks and crannies that might be created if the texture was a little bit more rough. My mixture of paper mache, I think it was about half and half, like 1 part water to 1 part flour. You can probably find some recipes online and you just have to tweak it until you're happy with the consistency. Paper mache has a tendency, especially for me, to just get everywhere, and it does get messy, but if you just clean it up before it dries, it shouldn't be any issues to your work surface or your clothes or your fingers or anything. So after you're done with your paper mache, you're going to let it dry. I let mine dry for 8 months because I was busy figuring out my life and I just kind of put the entire project on hold. So that's why you'll see the cameras and everything change quite drastically because we've changed our mind and how we wanted to make a video and how it's going to look like. Now with recordings from like up above, so it's easier to see what I'm actually doing rather than in the past where it's kind of hard to see what I'm actually doing when I'm making stuff. And now I have to make things less upside down. Before I really had to do everything upside down in order for the camera to see what I was doing. So hopefully in the future this will be much better for you guys to see. And now I'm just scratching my table. I'm sorry about that. I was trying to make some straight edges and make it look neat. But just be careful when you're doing this so you don't ruin the area that you're working at. My table is a work table, so I don't really mind if it does get a little bit scratchy. I'm texturing with a little bit of different tools. It doesn't matter that much how you texture it because you can always, after you let it dry, you can sand it and you can always cut off pieces with an X-Acto knife or a little blade in order to get the texture and the look of the sign that you want. So after I was done making the sign, I let it dry and then I started to glue it and paint it black as a base color, and that's when I realized that I wasn't happy with the shape of the sign. So I ended up actually using about an hour to cut pieces off again and then redo the entire process with gluing and painting the sign before I could continue with the detail work. Here I'm just trying to sculpt out the sign with my fingers. You don't really need any advanced tools or anything expensive in order to do this. The paper clay is quite willingly being molded into the shape that you want, but you kind of have to work a little bit fast, especially if you have warm hands like me, because it have a tendency to dry a little bit in the surface and then it might be a little bit hard to get it in the places that you want it to be. So the reason I'm using glue is to seal in the sign because I used paper clay that I made myself and that had joint compound in it and it's not that water resistant in the long term, so I wanted to protect the sign with a coat of glue. You might use something else as a base cover, but I found that wood glue works fine for me, so that's what I used to just seal in the clay and protect it from wear and tear. Once you glue the sign, especially my glue, it turned a little bit slippery, so it took 3 to 4 coats of black paint to cover it up. But I experienced that once you get the paint on, it does stick to the glue. But if you do have any problems with the paint not sticking to the glue because it's too slippery or like the surface is too smooth, you can probably always just sand it down a little bit in order to get the paint to stick better onto the glue. Starting off with the detail painting of the sign, I'm just mixing up some different shades of brown in order to make the wood look a little bit worn and enhance the depths and details of the plank part of the sign. I'm using some reference pictures. I took a screenshot from, I think it was Chamber of Secrets, because I really like how the sign looks in that movie. I know there's plenty good pictures online from the sign that's in Universal in the US, but I haven't been to the US, or like I have been to the US but not to Universals, so I haven't any, I don't know, I don't have any connection with that particular sign, so I really want to make the one in the movie because I have more fun memories from watching the movies. Anyways, just trying to get the paint on, make it look a little bit more like wood, and when I'm done with that, I can start with the detail work with the letters. Once I'm done with the brown color, I moved on to the hand part of the project, and it took a couple of coats in order to cover it completely. And I probably didn't really have to cover this part with black to begin with, but I just prefer it to be black. Just I like it as a base color in all my projects, but it's not something you have to do in order to get the same result in the end. So after a couple of layers, I started to shade it off a little bit, and I work a little bit more with it later on, and I probably overdid it, but you can always paint over what you did if you're not happy with it. It's not like you'd paint it once and then you're stuck with that result forever. When making the letters, I wanted to trace with a white pencil first in order to figure out where I wanted all the letters. I was just testing with a couple of different pencils on the back side to see which one would stick the best to the paint. So I found this white one worked really well. You could probably have another color as long as you pick a color that you can see against the dark background. For the drawing part, I didn't really have any specific plan on how to execute it. I was thinking maybe I could draw on top of the letters and maybe it would see, like it would come through and make an indent and did not in any circumstance come through at all. So in the end I just took my printouts from the text and I just looked at it and tried to freehand it the best I could. And you can see, I'm sorry, but I was focusing on the letters. I didn't see that my head was all over the screen almost the entire time. Sorry about that, but you can find the letters online. Just look at reference pictures, print them out in the size that you roughly want. It's a lot easier if you have a size that fits your sign. And then you just start tracing and then you can move on to painting the letters afterwards. So what I did with the lettering, I found it much easier to add really thin, light coats of paint that was mixed with a lot of water. Because if I had too thick paint, I felt that the letters turned a little chunky. So I rather went over a couple of times with thin layers of white paint or off-white paint in order to get the results I want. Then I was cleaning up the edges with some dark and black paint. Just be careful that if you do add a consistent dark edge around all the letters, you might want to blend it out with the brown in the background, or else the black kind of stands out a little bit too much. But in the end, when you cover a lot of this with details on top, it won't really be noticeable anyways, so don't worry about it. Lastly, for the text part of the sign, I'm using a sponge, just a kitchen sponge, just cut out a little piece of it. And then I'm gonna blend some different tones of brown and a little bit of red actually. And I'm just dabbing that all over the sign, making sure that it looks a little bit worn. I was looking at the reference picture that I had just to see where it was kind of mostly worn down, and I just really wanted to add that really dark, grimy look to the sign. I didn't want it to look like a freshly painted sign. I wanted it to look like it's been standing or like hanging on the wall for years. Then I moved over doing the same thing with the hand, and this is where I overdo it completely. I should have been using probably more pencil than a sponge in order to get the texture that I wanted. So we all make mistakes, but that's okay. Like, it's your sign or your project. You're allowed to do it whatever the way you want it, and you can always paint over it later on if you're not happy. And it's not supposed to be an identical copy of someone else's work. It's your work that you're doing. So I'm not apologetic that it's not identical to the picture. I feel like it got the essence of the project across, and that's what's important to me. So in the end, I'm pretty happy with it, even though I'm not completely happy with all the little pieces of the sign. Overall, I think it looks pretty okay. So in this video, I didn't really show a way to hang it up because I hadn't figured out yet like where I wanted it to hang, but in the picture I see that there are 4 nails into the wood plank, so it's kind of been nailed onto the wall. But I figure that you can always either cut out small holes into the paper and the cardboard on the back, or you can use some of those wall hangings that you can attach to your canvases. If you're painting regularly, you might have seen those. It's like stick-on hooks for your project, so you can just hang those on. You do whatever fits your wall or the purpose of your project. So this is the finished project of the Knockturn Alley sign. I hope you guys found it helpful and informative, and as always, thank you so much for watching.